The sun was up, birds were singing. Bert was not happy. Why so early, he grumbled. Bert was going to visit his wife's father. He loved his wife. He did not love early mornings. "It's a beautiful day," chirped his wife Mary. Bert grumbled again. He kissed Mary goodbye. He promised to be careful. He promised to be polite. He promised to be back before midnight. Then he set off on his adventure. The road to his father-in-law's house was long and dusty. Bert whistled a tune. He tried to forget about the early hour. He imagined the delicious lunch waiting for him. That thought made him smile. The sun climbed higher. Bert felt a presence beside him. He turned his head. A dark figure mimicked his every move. Bert stopped. The figure stopped too. Bert took a step back. The figure did the same. "A ghost!" he whispered, his voice trembling. He'd heard stories about these parts, stories of wandering spirits. He quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. But the ghost stayed with him. He started to run. The ghost ran too. Bert was out of breath, but he couldn't shake the ghostly figure. It was time for drastic measures. Bert had a brilliant idea. If the ghost was copying him, he would trick it. He stopped abruptly and threw his hat on the ground. The ghost, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment. Then it threw down a shadow of a hat. Bert grinned. This was working. He quickly removed his jacket and tossed it aside. The ghost, confused, did the same with its shadowy jacket. Bert, feeling triumphant, continued to shed his clothes one by one, until he stood there in his undergarments. The ghost, equally bare, just stood there. "Take that, you phantom!" he shouted in victory. But his victory was short-lived. What was he going to do now? He was miles from his destination and down to his skivvies. Bert had no choice. He had to reach his father-in-law's house. He crept through the bushes, hoping no one would see him. He looked like a wild man, with his messy hair and missing clothes. He finally reached the house. He peeked through a window. He saw his father-in-law, a large man with a booming laugh. Bert took a deep breath and knocked on the door. The door swung open. His father-in-law looked at him, his jaw dropping. "Thief!" he roared. He grabbed Bert by the collar and dragged him inside. Bert tried to explain, but his words tumbled out in a jumbled mess. Section 5. Recognition at last, or is it? "It's me, Bert, your son-in-law," he finally managed to sputter. His father-in-law looked closer. He squinted at Bert's face. He looked at Bert's knobbly knees. "Bert," he questioned, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. "What in the blazes are you doing here, dressed like that?" Bert, relieved to be recognized, launched into his story. He told him about the ghost. He told him about the clothes. He told him about the bush. By the end of the tale, his father-in-law was roaring with laughter. "Oh, Bert," he chuckled, wiping tears from his eyes. "That wasn't a ghost. That was your shadow." Bert's face turned red. A shadow? He had mistaken his own shadow for a ghost? How could he have been so silly? Section 6. Dinner and a side of disaster. Despite the rough start, Bert was welcomed into the house. He was given a change of clothes and a hearty meal. But his troubles were far from over. He sat at the dinner table, surrounded by his wife's family. He wanted to make a good impression. But his clumsiness had other plans. He knocked over a glass of water, soaking his trousers. He tried to spear a pea with his fork and sent it flying across the table. He even managed to get his tie stuck in the soup. Section 7. The infamous salt and pepper incident. The highlight of the meal, however, was the salt and pepper incident. Bert reached for the salt. He shook it vigorously. Nothing came out. He shook it even harder. Still nothing. "This salt shaker is broken!" he exclaimed, shaking it with all his might. His father-in-law, who had been watching him with amusement, finally spoke. "Bert, my boy, that's the pepper." Bert looked down at the shaker in his hand. It did look suspiciously like the pepper shaker. He coughed, his eyes watering from the cloud of pepper he'd just unleashed. "Of course," he mumbled, his face turning the same colour as the tablecloth. Section 8. Technology? What technology? After dinner, the family gathered in the living room. Bert's brother-in-law, a tech enthusiast, was showing off his new gadget. It was a voice-activated assistant. "Hey device," he said, "play some music." The device sprang to life, filling the room with music. Bert, who had never seen anything like it, was amazed. He decided to try it himself. "Hello, music!" he yelled at the device. "Play music!" The device, of course, did nothing. Bert looked confused. He tried again, this time louder. Still nothing. His nephews and nieces giggled. His father-in-law patted him on the back. "It's all right, Bert," he chuckled. "Not everyone understands the intricacies of modern technology." Section 9. Acceptance and affection. As the day wore on, Bert continued to provide unintentional entertainment. He put the cat outside, thinking it was a stray. He tried to open a jar of pickles by shaking it upside down. He even managed to lock himself in the bathroom, mistaking the doorknob for a coat hook. But despite all his blunders, Bert's in-laws couldn't help but love him. He was kind, he was genuine, and he made them laugh. They realized that beneath his clumsiness and naivety, there was a heart of gold. Section 10. A happy ending for everyone but the furniture. By the end of the visit, the house was a disaster zone. There were spills, there were breakages, and there was a distinct lack of furniture in its rightful place. But there was also a lot of laughter. As Bert and Mary said their goodbyes, his father-in-law pulled him aside. "You're a walking disaster, Bert," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "But you're family." And with that, he pulled Bert into a bear hug, nearly knocking the wind out of him. Bert, relieved and happy, hugged him back. He might be clumsy, he might be naive, but he was accepted. And in the end, that's all that mattered.